Welcome. I am Ava, and this is WNBA Trending. What happens when competition turns into culture? What happens when two athletes become symbols of something much bigger than basketball? And what happens when someone like Shaquille O'Neal decides to ask the question that many people are thinking, but few are willing to say out loud? That's exactly what happened when NBA legend Shaquille O'Neal publicly raised a conversation about Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. Not about their stats, not about a single game, but about the narrative surrounding them. And the moment he asked that question, it shifted the conversation from highlights to something deeper. Pressure, perception, media framing, and the responsibility placed on young athletes in today's sports culture. Let's briefly explain what happened. Shaquille O'Neal, widely known as Shaq, spoke about Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese during a public discussion. He essentially questioned why the rivalry between them is treated so differently depending on who people support. He challenged the media narrative, asking whether both players are being judged fairly and whether the public conversation is helping or hurting them. His comments weren't dramatic. They weren't hostile, but they were direct. And sometimes direct questions make people uncomfortable. Because this isn't just about two WNBA players. It's about how modern sports culture works. Caitlin Clark, the star guard for the Indiana Fever, entered the WNBA with unprecedented attention. From her historic scoring run in college to record-breaking viewership numbers, she brought a spotlight that women's basketball hasn't experienced in decades. Angel Reese, now a standout for the Chicago Sky, built her own powerful brand through confidence, personality, and championship success. Both athletes are talented. Both are competitive. Both are unapologetic. But the way the public conversation treats them often feels very different. Shaq's question, at its core, was simple. Are we being fair? Are we creating narratives that elevate one while unfairly scrutinizing the other? That question matters. Because rivalries are healthy in sports. Magic Johnson and Larry Bird had won. Serena Williams and Maria Sharapova had won. Great competition drives interest. But when rivalry becomes polarized identity, when fans feel forced to choose sides not just athletically but emotionally, the pressure multiplies. And here's where the deeper issue begins. Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese are not just basketball players anymore. They are brands. They are symbols. They are social media topics. Every gesture, every quote, every facial expression is analyzed in slow motion and debated online. That level of visibility is new for the WNBA. And with visibility comes scrutiny. Shaq understands fame at the highest level. He understands how narratives can spiral. When he asks whether the coverage is balanced, he's speaking from experience. He knows what it's like to have your personality amplified and misunderstood at the same time. In today's sports world, media doesn't just report events. It frames them. When Caitlin Clark shows emotion, it's often described as passion. When Angel Reese shows emotion, sometimes it's labeled differently depending on who's telling the story. That inconsistency is part of what Shaq was addressing. Not accusing, not attacking, just questioning. And questioning narratives is important, because the modern athlete is dealing with pressures that didn't exist 20 years ago. Social media has changed everything. Every game becomes content. Every rivalry becomes trending hashtags. Fan bases clash online in ways that have nothing to do with basketball fundamentals. Young athletes are expected to perform, represent their teams, represent their communities, and navigate digital criticism, all at once. Caitlin Clark entered the league with record ticket sales and expectations that she would save the league. That's an enormous burden for a rookie. Angel Reese entered with expectations tied to confidence, image, and a strong personality that some celebrate and others critique. That's also a burden. Shaq's question forces us to consider something uncomfortable. Are we supporting these athletes, or are we projecting our own narratives onto them? There's also a deeper cultural layer here. Rivalries between women athletes often get framed differently than men's rivalries. When male athletes trash talk, it's intensity. When women do it, it sometimes becomes character analysis. That difference matters. Angel Reese has openly embraced her identity as confident and expressive. Caitlin Clark has embraced her identity as competitive and focused. Neither approach is wrong. They are different personalities in a league that is growing and evolving. But when fans reduce them to opposing camps, when it becomes Team Clark versus Team Reese, instead of appreciation for both, the conversation shifts from sport to spectacle. And spectacle brings clicks. Sports media thrives on narratives. Controversy drives engagement. Rivalry drives ratings. But at some point, we have to ask whether that model protects the athletes themselves. Because these are young women in their early 20s navigating unprecedented fame. Mental pressure in professional sports is real. We've seen athletes across all sports speak openly about burnout, anxiety, and the toll of constant scrutiny. The expectation to be perfect on the court while handling criticism off it is intense. Imagine having every bad game dissected not just by analysts, but by millions of strangers online. Imagine your facial expressions turned into viral clips. Imagine your family reading comments that question your character. That's the environment Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese are operating in. Shaq's question doesn't attack either of them. It challenges the system around them. And that's where this conversation becomes bigger than basketball. The WNBA is in a growth phase. Ratings are rising. Attendance is rising. Sponsorship deals are expanding. With growth comes attention. With attention comes noise. The challenge is making sure that growth doesn't come at the expense of athlete well-being. Social media amplifies everything. A hard foul becomes a trending debate. A post-game quote becomes a viral controversy. Fans build narratives in real time, often without full context. Player privacy is shrinking. Years ago, athletes could go home after a game and disconnect. Today, their phones are part of the arena. Notifications don't stop. Opinions don't pause. When Shaq asks whether the question is being handled fairly, he's essentially reminding people that there are human beings at the center of the storyline. And here's something important. Rivalries can coexist with respect. Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese have both publicly acknowledged each other's talent. They compete hard. That's their job. But the idea that there must be tension beyond the court often comes more from outside than from within. Fans sometimes escalate what players simply see as competition. That escalation can create unrealistic expectations. It can also create divisions in fan communities that distract from the game itself. The bigger meaning of Shaq's question is about balance. Can we celebrate Caitlin Clark's shooting brilliance without diminishing Angel Reese's dominance and presence? Can we recognize Angel Reese's confidence without questioning Caitlin Clark's composure? The answer should be yes. But the sports ecosystem doesn't always operate that way. There's also a financial angle. Both players are driving attention that increases league revenue. Rivalry is good for business. But long-term success depends on sustainable narratives, not constant controversy. If the conversation becomes too polarized, it risks overshadowing team dynamics and the broader talent pool in the league. And let's talk about identity. Both Clark and Reese represent different styles, backgrounds, and expressions of confidence. That diversity is a strength for the WNBA. It allows different audiences to connect with different players. It expands the league's reach. But when media framing simplifies that diversity into conflict, nuance disappears. Shaq, having experienced media cycles himself, likely understands how quickly narratives harden. Once a storyline takes hold, it can be difficult to reshape. That's why asking the question early matters. We also need to acknowledge how fast fame arrived for both players. The transition from college stardom to professional scrutiny happened almost overnight. Adjusting to professional competition is already challenging. Adjusting while under a national microscope is even harder. Mental resilience becomes as important as physical skill. And we've seen in other sports how constant media intensity can affect performance. Confidence can fluctuate. Self-expression can become guarded. Athletes can start playing cautiously, not because of opponents, but because of headlines. That's not healthy for the game. The beauty of sports is authenticity, the competitive fire, the emotional moments. If players feel they must constantly manage perception, authenticity fades. Shaq's willingness to raise a thoughtful question signals that veteran voices recognize this tension. It's not about taking sides. It's about asking whether we are building a sports culture that supports athletes or consumes them. There's also a generational shift happening. Younger fans engage through clips, short-form content, and online debates. That environment rewards quick takes rather than long reflection. But topics like fairness, narrative framing, and athlete well-being require reflection. Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese will likely face each other many more times in their careers. That rivalry can define an era in a positive way if handled thoughtfully. History shows that great rivalries elevate leagues. They bring attention, passion, and storytelling. But they work best when rooted in mutual excellence, not manufactured division. Shaq's question invites everyone, media, fans, analysts, to consider their role in shaping the narrative. Are we amplifying talent? Or are we amplifying tension? Are we supporting growth? Or are we chasing engagement? The impact of this conversation extends beyond basketball. It reflects how modern fame works in general. Young public figures across industries face similar pressures: constant visibility, rapid judgment, and reduced privacy. Sports just makes it more visible. If there's one takeaway from this moment, it's that awareness matters. Awareness of how words shape perception. Awareness of how headlines influence fan behavior. Awareness that athletes are human first. Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese are competitors. They are also young women navigating extraordinary circumstances. As fans, the healthiest approach might be appreciation rather than opposition. Because in the end, the league benefits when talent shines without unnecessary distortion. Shaq asked a question. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was important. And sometimes the most important conversations in sports aren't about the scoreboard. They're about the culture surrounding it. This moment reminds us that sports are powerful not just because of competition, but because of what they reveal about society, about fairness, narrative, and empathy. If we want women's basketball to continue rising, the conversation around it must rise too. For WNBA Trending, I'm Ava. And this discussion isn't just about two players. It's about how we choose to watch, support, and speak about the athletes shaping the future of the game. Before we close, I want to leave you with 3 questions. Do you think media narratives influence how we see athletes more than their actual performance? Can rivalry exist without turning into division? And how should fans balance passion with respect in today's social media era? Let me know your thoughts.